been teaching, you've taught a number of courses, um, going back a number of years at senior college.
Yeah.
Um, so you've done face to face, and now this year you undertook teaching via Zoom the spiritual life of Abraham Lincoln.
Yes.
Um, and what a good year it was to teach that. I mean, what a good
Yes.
time it is
Yeah.
to teach that. Um, what was your initial reaction to teaching on Zoom? How did you feel about it?
Uh, in this new way, Zoom, or in the original way?
Well, oh, you've done both.
Yeah.
So you've taught virtually before you actually taught senior college Zoom.
No, no. So I wasn't sure whether you wanted me to say what my reaction was to teaching by Zoom or to senior college in the first place.
Well, both. I'd love to hear
Okay.
senior college.
Well, I began working with a group called the Idea of America Network from Colonial Williamsburg, speaking of Virginia. And I wanted to teach that material on the values in America, in American history, and the senior college was the perfect place to do that. Uh, and the Hutchinson Center was. So that's how I got started with senior college. The Zoom thing was this year, and my reaction to it was uh, panic. I felt overwhelmed. I felt like I can't do this. Uh, but Alan Arthur,
Al Arthur. Hmm.
Al Arthur helped me a lot, and Deirdre Good helped me a lot to find a way into it. So now it's kind of fun. I do miss the interaction, and I told my class the other day I want them to use their cameras more so I get to see them.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
Sometimes they just put up a little black box, but so it was difficult.
Yeah, it's hard teaching. It's like acting with without an audience. You don't get to gauge reaction and
Right,
people's,
right,
you don't read the facial expressions as
right.
readily with
Exactly. Yeah.
Zoom. Um, although I'm finding one advantage is the people who can come to the class from far away and enjoy the class along with people from here in Belfast.
Yeah.
That has been wonderful. And also during the cold winter months, it's been really nice to have people who would not be going to the Hutchinson Center because they don't care to drive with ice and snow and they don't get out.
Right. Yeah. I
So
don't. I don't miss the parking lot and
I know, and I don't miss,
the
well, I
wind.
never did. I
Yeah.
always had to have my husband drop me off when the weather was really bad
Right.
because didn't want to walk. Um, but I want to talk a little bit about your class though, because back, I think it was December, there was an article about Thomas Jefferson, which Deidre mentioned that you had seen. Well, I got the New Yorker and I had read it, and of course, there's been so much talk about Jefferson these days, and I'm sure if there was a statue of Jefferson anywhere up here, it would be torn down by this time. But the renaming of schools, Virginia has been um, undergoing a lot of this. I mean, there have been a lot of schools named Jefferson, even in Alexandria, where I lived.
Hmm.
Arlington has a Jefferson school, and they're all talking about renaming it George Washington High School. They've taken the Lee off of Washington and Lee, so there's all of this um, turmoil going on. And to me, this is almost a surface reaction to it. We have to get deeper into the topic rather than just removing names. That's not the answer necessarily. But I thought, um, I thought Lincoln's comments about Jefferson and Lincoln's feelings about Jefferson reflected in this article were pretty amazing. The
Hmm.
way
Hmm.
Lincoln viewed Jefferson, and that might help us today in in reevaluating the founding fathers as slaveholders in our perspective of looking at our country today. I don't know how you feel about that, but it seems like if Lincoln could hold him in esteem, why can't we have a little bit of that? Why can't we
Yeah,
see a little bit of that?
yeah. Well,
Because Lincoln is our,
Lincoln was Lincoln was remarkably rational and objective, um, for a man who was as empathic as he was. So he was. Uh, he said that the Declaration of Independence and Independence Hall, where he raised the flag on Washington's birthday on his way to DC to be inaugurated, he said he had never had a political sentiment in his life that didn't come from Independence Hall and the Declaration of Independence. So Jefferson was the keystone to his belief in the idea of equality. But he personally, at different times, was uh, really repulsed by Jefferson's lifestyle.
mhm.
Um, so he was able to hold both realities in his mind and heart. He was able to hold the democratic value of freedom and equality and his own moral repugnance and hatred of slavery, and see a man like Jefferson as complicated enough to have both qualities. And that's, I think that's what you're saying we need a little more of right now.
Oh,
It,
I definitely we need to see that.
yeah,
Uh, it's just it seems like in this country everything is, to use a tired old term, black and white. There's no more gray left. And Jefferson, and Lincoln was able to see that. And to me, it seems like that if Lincoln, who is held up by both political, you know, both right and left as
mhm,
being a virtuous, moral man who did so much to unite and make this country. If he can see it, why can't the rest of us see it?
yeah.
Um, I thought the article was incredibly good. I
I,
enjoyed the article very
I,
much.
I did too, and it was directly relevant to the purpose of my course, which is to
That's
try.
what I thought. I thought, my goodness, it's timely.
I was shocked. I've been trying to reach the New Yorker to see if I can get Vincent Cunningham to speak to our class or to senior college, because his uh, tact on Lincoln was so much what the course is about in terms of trying to find a unified national narrative. So
Have you heard from him or?
I have not. I keep sending the New Yorker funny little emails to see if I can get their attention.
Yeah, I know. Sometimes
Yeah,
it's difficult, but it's interesting because during the month of January, well, and into February, our minister John Neiman led a discussion on Howard Thurman's book on Jesus,
yeah,
and the poor, and so we had read that, and of course he refers to that in this series. It's like everything that I had been reading and talking about and thinking. I've done a lot of reading of David Blight's pieces on Frederick Douglass,
right.
the woman from Harvard, and why can't I think of her name? The three names.
Jill LaPont.
No, the black woman, who writes on Jefferson.
Oh, I
Oh,
don't know.
what is her name? Well, anyway, she and David Blight talk a lot,
Yeah,
but she is the Jefferson scholar, and it's just sort of this one article. It was like, whoom, it's all come together.
I
Ralph Waldo
know. I
Emerson.
have a I have an autographed copy of a book by Howard Thurman that he wrote
Ah,
to me in 1965.
oh my goodness.
So I was really amazed that the New Yorker article author quoted Howard Thurman.
Well, what do you know about Vincent Cunningham aside from the fact he's
Nothing,
a York? Yeah.
nothing, except that he's a black man. I know that, and that he knows enough about the Bible and religion to be able to deal with it honestly without prejudice.
And
Uh,
American history. I
oh,
mean,
sure, yeah,
yeah, I mean, he's just well versed in all those areas. And I thought to myself, oh, why didn't I? Well, I've signed up for so many classes and I should have signed up for yours. But as president, I gave
Mm.
up. It just so much. It's like I'm surrounded by alligators all of a sudden. Everything becomes a political issue on the board, which
Yeah,
I didn't think I was going to have. I thought with COVID it was going to be easy, but it's
yeah,
not.
yeah.
Uh, so, so have you found in your class? Are you able to? Have you had discussions in the class? Does that work pretty well with Zoom? Or are you?
It's problematic still.
Yeah.
If you know, I remember using the seminar rooms at the Hutchinson Center, and I could walk around and make facial contact with people and uh, encourage people in ways that you can't do on video. And uh, people are shy and passive and quiet in a way now after a year of being locked down that it's been hard to get people to want to talk.
Mhm, mhm. Or in some cases that want to talk, talk, talk.
Yeah.
I've had the opposite, it's gone both
Yeah.
ways.
Well, I started the class with the first section was called We Know Lincoln, because as I've given talks around the state and often in libraries, uh, people will come up to me and tell me a personal story about how they have this token, this relic, this object that their father or their grandfather gave them that has to do with Lincoln. Uh, and what I've discovered is that many people have what they consider a personal reason to connect to Lincoln. So I began the class by saying, "What's yours?"
Mhm.
And people had stuff to say, and it was very moving.
Yeah.
People talked about, my father was tall like Lincoln, and I felt bad that Lincoln's birthday wasn't as celebrated as George Washington's. And, I went to the Lincoln Memorial when I was 6. Stories like that. So people are willing to share some of that. So in this week's class, I'm going to ask them to talk a little more about their own. We're going to talk about the idea of the sacred to get to uh, how you can combine religious values and secular politics. So I'm going to ask people what they think of as sacred in America and for them. So I think personal sharing is a little more likely than intellectual reflection.
Mhm, mhm. Well, but that's maybe the way you build towards intellectual reflection by starting with the personal sharing. I don't know. I have toyed with how do I make any class on Zoom more interactive.
Yeah,
I don't teach great deep intellectual topics. I've done mythology and I've taught fairy tales and um,
yeah,
British mystery fiction was my first, class, and it was easy because I passed out a shortbread cookie and a tea bag, and I said, "Okay, this is the way mysteries start. You need something to read while you're having your tea and cookie."
yeah,
Uh, but the thing about Lincoln is really interesting to me because I have kept on my desk for many years his wonderful, wonderful line. And of course, I memorized the Gettysburg Address like we all did, but the line from the second inaugural address about our better angels.
yeah,
And all during the past 4 years, I kept praying for our better angels to come back to us as a
yeah,
people. And I still hope, although I get very discouraged at times.
yeah,
It's not easy watching all this happen, and you do wonder what would what would Jesus do? What would Lincoln do? What would he
yeah,
say today? Because he almost has that stature. I mean, he's almost there in our minds as sort of um, a Christian symbol as well as a politician, and you don't have many of those. He's mythic in proportion to the American people.
Well, he is. You talk about memorizing the Gettysburg Address. I just read an article uh, from a newsletter of the uh, New York Society of Lincoln Followers. Uh, they have a magazine called Awake, and because he Wide Awake, because he had these youth uh, fans that were called the Wide Awakes, and this man was the oldest living survivor of the people who had organized the Gettysburg Address. He had only been 29 when he was on that commission. So I think in 1909 he wrote this article, and he said that people will remember and will recite the Gettysburg Address in the same way as Christians know and recite the Lord's Prayer. Now that's a remarkable
It is
uh,
remarkable.
combination of traditions, sacred scripture and political address. And what's so amazing about Lincoln is he had the depth to be able to feel and intuit and believe the deepest values in our religious traditions without um, a lot of church dogma, without church ritual. He never was baptized. He never really joined a church, but he had deep relationships with two Presbyterian ministers in his life. So he was, the reason he's up there, as you say, is because he was willing to suffer and then to think about it and to feel it. And then he was just blessed, to frankly, he just had
Something.
a beautiful nature.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I said, though passion may have strained, I think it's one of the most beautiful passages in the
Hmm.
English language. It's poetry, it's prose, everything all
Yeah,
combined in one, and it's a prayer. Deep
it is. It
to
is.
me, it is a prayer,
Yeah.
and I've never, and being a Southerner.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Interesting. I have sort of a strange Southern background. I have
Yeah.
a great, 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 great grandfather named Reverend David Rice,
Hmm.
who was one of the founders of a Presbyterian college in Virginia called Hampton Sydney College.
Sure, I know him. This city. Yeah.
David, he had gone to Princeton University, and
Hmm.
he he was a chaplain in the Continental Army, but actually um, left Virginia because of slavery in the
Hmm.
early part of the 19th
Wow.
century, went to Kentucky and established the first Presbyterian church in Kentucky. And it's Reverend David Rice. And
Really?
I was
Huh.
very, 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 I
Hmm.
did a lot of searching in genealogy, and I never found any quote slaveholders in my family until
Hmm.
finally one side on my father. But my mother's people were all, German and Pennsylvania Dutch, and then old Virginian, but
Yeah.
they never been slaveholders, small farmers. And so when I found this David Rice, I was just thrilled. It's sort of like, oh, I have a claim to
Wow.
something greater than a Southern,
Yeah.
person. And I don't know much about him. I've seen monuments, and I'm trying to do a little more research about him.
Well,
He
that
died
would be interesting.
in
My,
1809, so he died about the time Lincoln was born. But uh,
wow.
he ended up in Kentucky, and I look at Kentucky today, and I thought, oh, what in
Yeah.
the world happened to Kentucky? But how did you get into Lincoln? What brought you
So,
to the study of Lincoln?
um, I want to say something about the your relative. My father was the vice president of Louisville Presbyterian Seminary in the 70s. Uh, and I've served
Oh,
a uh, church in Kentucky, and my father served several Presbyterian churches in Kentucky. His first church was in Frankfort, Kentucky. So Presbyterian churches in Kentucky go deep into my family. I went to Davidson College, so
of course.
um, Presbyterians in the South I'm
Right.
connected to. Um, but my beginning with Lincoln is a little bit like, well, and the idea of the sacred is something that calls you, you don't call it. The sacred doesn't come as a conclusion. So when Rebecca and I moved to Belfast, we felt the attraction, not the decision to come to Belfast. Similarly, anything holy comes that way. And um, Lincoln came to me that way. I saw a movie when I was maybe 13 called Rain Tree County
Uh,
with Elizabeth Taylor and
Montgomery
Montgomery Clift.
Cliff.
And it had to do with a, a disturbed feminine figure and craziness and insanity, and it had to do with race and interracial relationships and uh, slavery. And at the end of that uh, melodramatic story, I tried to read the book years later. There's a scene where the Lincoln funeral train is wending its way back to the Midwest. And it just gave me a feeling of transcendent, unifying truth. And I thought that's what this man must have stood for. And so the themes in my life have to do with working for racial justice. And I was a psychotherapist for years and helping many of my clients, patients were women. And so the the crazy Elizabeth Taylor and the race things were kind of early imprints in my life, and Lincoln kind of held them together.
Mhm.
So uh, I felt like that's when I got touched by Lincoln, and then just the rest has just followed. I've always gone to Lincoln memorial places. When my family was in Kentucky, we went to see uh, his birth home. When I moved to New Harmon, Indiana, I was 50 miles away from his boyhood home in Indiana. Uh, so
It was just
uh,
there
that's
waiting.
where it started. Yeah,
New Harmony. Um, what do I, it wasn't Quaker settlement. What was, there was some,
they were called Rappites,
okay,
and the Rappites were German uh, pietists and separatists. They were like the pilgrims to the German Rappites to the German church were like pilgrims to the English church. So they left and came to the United States and started these utopian communities. And they weren't democratic so much as they were almost cult like, but they were fantastic people. And they created several different harmony towns, one in Pennsylvania. And then they left and they sold their town to a Scottish industrialist who, boy, I can't remember his name now, a very famous socialist, and he made it into a Robert Owen was his
oh,
name,
okay, sure.
and so then it was
I
the
know the
Owenites.
Robert Owen part,
Yeah.
right, right. And
So
he brought people there and they worked in, yeah.
right.
Um, yeah, yeah, I do. It's all coming back to me now. It's been a long time since I've thought about all of that, but
Yeah.
that, that area was where, I mean, the abolitionist movement that, well, the abolitionists that passed through there. And
Hmm.
I don't know whether you know the books of Marilyn Robinson. Do you know
Yes. Hmm.
Marilyn Robinson?
I
Well,
do.
and they settled, people from Searsport actually settled some of the towns where, well, Grinnell College, and which I think she calls Tabor College.
Hmm.
She has names for these. They're all Arlen Lawson taught the courses, which I took on Marilyn Robinson, but that
Yeah.
same sort of uh, seeking the new, the better, going
Yeah.
across the country, which is pioneer movement in America.
Well, there were three young men from Maine who all uh, two of them went to Bates College, and one became a Presbyterian minister, the other became a congregational minister. Uh, they moved to Kentucky and Illinois, and one started an abolitionist newspaper, and the other became a congressman. Uh,
Oh my goodness.
Lovejoy, Robert Lovejoy, and he
Was this
was the
1950s or in that period or?
1840s, 1850s. Owen Lovejoy was, I think his first name was Owen, was the John Quincy Adams said he was the first martyr for the what's the First Amendment? Talk about free speech, because
Mhm.
his he was publishing in Alton, Illinois, an abolitionist newspaper, and the people opposed to abolition kept throwing his printing press into the Mississippi River. He was in St. Louis at first, and they finally shot him and burned his building down.
Oh,
Uh, so Reverend Lovejoy from Searsport, Maine, is kind of a hero in the abolitionist movement, and then his brother was a very good friend of Lincoln's.
oh,
Uh,
okay. Oh, how it all ties together. My
yeah.
goodness. Well, I hope you teach another course on Zoom or
Okay. Thank
whatever.
you. Thank you.
If you
Yeah.
don't, you'll teach one in person and I'll be there. I've got,
Excellent. Well, I'll be glad to have
I
you be
may,
there.
I may ask Al if I can pay a pro rate and come to the rest of your site.
Well,
Now, I'm very, very curious about this. Well, I can't thank you enough for doing this, and I hope
yeah.
Al
Thank
can.
you.
It's just fascinating. I'm so glad to finally meet you. I've
Thank you,
heard
Nancy. Yeah.
about you ever since I've been involved in senior college, and
Hmm.
your name would come up, and oh, he's, meet a course on Lincoln. Let's call Duncan and that sort of thing. So I just did a, you know, I think the first thing I remember about Lincoln, and you may recall the series of books that came out. They were little orange books that were written for primary. I read very early, and they were written for probably 10 and 11-year-olds. And you've got one right there. That's it. That's it. Well,
Yeah.
that's the Carl Sandburg, right?
Yeah. But those orange ones, I know the other, they're different.
Orange one was like Abraham Lincoln,
Boy,
boy,
something. Yeah.
something, Martha Washington,
Yeah.
girl. Da, da, da.
I,
I ate those up. I
I
couldn't
did too.
keep
Yeah.
up.
Do
And
you know in town, Ray Estabrook?
oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He read them too.
Oh, good. So we ought to have a society. Oh, which reminded me, my first question to you, and I forgot to ask it. Why are you called the Labyrinth Master?
Oh.
The game loft. Are you a Duncan? I mean, is that Dungeon and Dragons?
No, the labyrinth is a walking meditation that
Oh, at the waterfront.
right.
Okay.
So I went to Chartres Cathedral in 2009 and was trained to be a labyrinth facilitator.
Oh,
Part of
okay.
the spiritual direction that I offer people is to go on labyrinth walks to meditate and regenerate new ways of looking and feeling at life. And the reason I moved to New Harmony is there was a Chartres labyrinth in New Harmony. Uh,
Oh, okay.
so so that's been an avocation and a calling of mine, and I was able to connect to the garden club women in town who had been wanting to build a labyrinth here for a long time. So I was able to testify at the city council to help
Mhm.
get that over the hump, and then they were responsible for raising the $30,000. And I think Belfast is the only town in America that has a civic sponsored labyrinth.
Now that I did not know.
Yeah,
I am also a member of the garden club, and
yeah,
I've been I'm well, I've been the chair or the committee convener of the memorial committee for Anne Mullen, who
yeah.
died in
But
December, and we are putting in an Anne Mullen Grove at Wales Park. It'll be a
right,
little area with birch trees and some of her favorite plantings and a bench
wonderful.
where
That's
people
wonderful.
can sit and reflect on her commitment and what she did in this city.
Yeah.
So
Well, she's
it's
the one that connected me to the garden club. She was a wonderful woman.
wasn't she incredible?
That's
She just
that's remarkable.
she inspirational. And so I
Yeah.
had this idea early on when I read of her. Her birthday was last fall, and we all
Hmm.
sent birthday cards to her. And I know
Hmm.
Sally Campbell made a cake and took it to her. And then we got the word that she had died, and I was
Hmm.
horrified. So
Yeah.
the next Garden Club meeting, I said, I think we ought to do something to memorialize Anne. I didn't know that well, but I just watched her. I
Yeah.
watched her pull her wagon. I watched her,
Yeah.
she, 10, at least 10 years older than I am and could do it. I don't know. The fact that she had done Union Square in New York City was
Mhm.
another thing that just when I read that, oh my goodness, this woman deserves a memorial.
Yes,
So
she
she's getting
does.
one, and we're going to have to raise money. So we figured if we can get, I've forgotten our, if we can get 150 people to chip in $20, we can
Mhm.
pay for all of this. So we think we can do it.
Well,
I've got,
I'll do that because I was really touched by her.
well, I'm touched by much I find these days. Maybe
Yeah.
it's age that is touching me, but there's one thing about COVID, there's been a lot of time to reflect on so much.
Yeah.
And that's good in a way. It's slowed my life down and I'm spending a lot more time. The business with the tea, I find that the ritual of tea in the afternoon has been a really good thing for me.
Good.
Um,
Good. Yeah.
and I'm excited to hear about your blending. So I
Yeah.
will say goodbye now, and I will
Well,
thank
thank you.
you on behalf of senior college, and
Yeah.
I hope your class goes well, and maybe I can peek in. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I
Tell
enjoyed this.
Rebecca hello.
I will do that.
Okay,
Bye bye.
bye bye.